Welcome to this episode, The Nature of Community. What do we owe to each other? In this exploration, we will journey into one of the oldest and most fundamental questions of human existence. What does it mean to live in community? From ancient villages to modern cities, from religious congregations to online networks, humans have always sought connection, belonging, and cooperation. Yet, community is more than physical closeness. It is built on shared values, obligations, and the invisible threads of responsibility that link one person to another. We will examine how different philosophical, religious, and cultural traditions have defined community and how they have interpreted the duties that flow from it. We'll consider whether caring for one another is simply a choice or whether it is a moral duty. We'll ask what distinguishes a true community from a group of individuals who merely share space. We'll look at how communities can both liberate and constrain, empower and demand. Thinkers from Aristotle to Martin Buber to John Rawls have wrestled with these questions, as have spiritual traditions like Christianity, Buddhism, and Islam. Stories from literature, such as Victor Hugo's Les Miserables or Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, remind us that community is tested in the moments of compassion or neglect between neighbors. By the end of this video, I hope you'll walk away not only with a deeper philosophical understanding, but also with personal reflections on your place within the communities that shape your life. Are you a passive member or an active participant? Do you see community as an obligation or an opportunity? Let's begin by grounding ourselves in the ancient roots of community. The idea of community is as old as humanity itself. In fact, Aristotle famously declared that man is by nature a political animal, meaning that our very essence is fulfilled in living with others. For him, the polis, the city-state, was not simply an administrative unit, but the highest form of human association. It was in the polis that individuals discovered justice, law, and virtue. Without it, one was either a beast or a god, but not truly human. This belief rooted community not in convenience, but in necessity. Other ancient traditions affirmed similar truths. In Confucian thought, the family was seen as the first and most essential community, the microcosm of the larger order. To be human was to exist in relationships of care, respect, and obligation, where harmony was achieved through rightly ordered roles. Meanwhile, in early Jewish traditions, covenant was central. The idea that a people bound by God's law also had responsibilities toward one another, from hospitality to the poor to justice for the oppressed. We see here that ancient communities were not primarily about individual freedom, but about shared purpose, moral order, and survival. To live outside of community was to be incomplete. These foundations still echo in our understanding today. But as history unfolded, new questions arose. Are communities natural, or are they constructed? Do they liberate the individual or bind them too tightly? These tensions lead us into our next exploration: community as moral duty. When we think about community today, we often imagine choice, where we live, who we spend time with, what groups we join. But many philosophers and religious thinkers have argued that community is not just a choice, it is a duty. To belong to a community means to owe something to others beyond ourselves. For example, Christianity emphasizes the idea of agape, or self-giving love, where neighbors and even strangers are to be cared for as if they were family. The parable of the Good Samaritan shows that community stretches beyond blood ties, extending even across lines of culture and conflict. Buddhism teaches the principle of karuna, compassion, which is not selective but universal. The Buddhist Sangha, or community of practitioners, illustrates how interdependence is essential for growth. Similarly, Islam's concept of ummah emphasizes the collective responsibility of believers to care for one another, blending spiritual and social duties. Philosopher Martin Buber, in his book I and Thou, explains that human beings come fully alive in authentic relationships. When we treat one another not as objects but as sacred thous, we realize the true depth of community. John Rawls, meanwhile, suggests that justice itself requires us to imagine ourselves behind a veil of ignorance, considering fairness as if we didn't know what place we would occupy in society. These teachings converge on one central truth: community cannot be reduced to self-interest. It is not about what we gain, but about what we give. The moral duty to others defines what it means to be part of something larger than ourselves. Communities are powerful, but they are also fragile. They depend on trust, shared values, and the willingness of individuals to act with care. When those elements are missing, communities fracture. A neighborhood without trust becomes a collection of houses, not a home. A society without shared values becomes a battlefield of interests, not a collective. Literature provides vivid reminders of this fragility. In William Golding's Lord of the Flies, a group of boys stranded on an island attempt to create community, but without strong moral anchors, chaos overtakes them. In contrast, Victor Hugo's Les Misérables shows how acts of compassion, like the bishop's kindness to Jean Valjean, can heal the fractures of community and restore its fabric. Dostoevsky's The Brothers, Karamazov confronts us with the question, if God does not exist, is everything permitted? Can a community survive without transcendent moral grounding? Modern life complicates this fragility even further. Technology connects us digitally, yet many feel lonelier than ever. Communities dissolve not only through conflict, but also through apathy, when people stop engaging, stop showing up, stop believing their role matters. Apathy is as much a threat as violence. To sustain a true community, we must be intentional. We must see beyond ourselves, invest in others, and resist the temptation to treat community as disposable. The fragility of community is not a reason to give up on it. It is a reason to nurture it more carefully. A central philosophical debate about community is the relationship between the individual and the collective. Are we first and foremost independent selves who then choose to form groups? Or are we inherently social beings whose very selves are formed through community? Philosophers like Aristotle and Hegel argued for the latter. The self cannot exist outside of relationships. Even our sense of identity, language, and values are inherited from the communities we grow up in. We are, in a sense, community made flesh. Modern thinkers like Charles Taylor also emphasize the dialogical self, the idea that who we are is always shaped by the recognition or lack thereof from others. But other thinkers like John Stuart Mill highlight the dangers of the collective smothering individuality. Mill insists that communities should protect the freedom of eccentricity, allowing individuals to experiment with life and thought. Without this, community devolves into conformity. Religion also addresses this tension. In Judaism, the Talmud teaches that saving a single life is as if one has saved the whole world, underscoring the value of the individual within the collective. Buddhism balances individual enlightenment with communal practice in the Sangha. Christianity blends the uniqueness of each person as made in God's image with the idea of being one body in Christ. The truth may lie in a paradox. The individual and the community are not opposites but mirrors. Each needs the other. To protect the self is to protect community. To nurture community is to nurture the self. No community can thrive without justice. Justice is the glue that holds a group of people together, ensuring that obligations are not simply words, but lived realities. Without fairness, trust dissolves. Without trust, community collapses. Plato, in the Republic, framed justice as everyone performing their proper role for the good of the whole. While his vision may seem rigid today, it still points to the idea that justice is not merely about individuals, but about harmony within the community. In modern philosophy, John Rawls proposed that a just community must be built on principles chosen from behind a veil of ignorance, ensuring fairness without bias toward one's own position. Religious traditions echo this. Islam emphasizes ADL, justice, holding that society must protect the vulnerable. Christianity teaches that communities are judged by how they treat the least of these. Buddhism warns that suffering arises when communities fail to act with compassion and fairness. These teachings remind us that justice is not abstract. It is lived through how we care for those at the margins. Communities without justice may look strong from the outside, but they are hollow within. History offers painful reminders of this. Systems built on inequality eventually unravel, leaving scars that last for generations. A true community, therefore, is not simply defined by shared space or common rituals, but by fairness and moral integrity. Justice is the foundation on which belonging must rest. Throughout history, religion has been one of the most powerful forces shaping how humans understand community. In Christianity, the metaphor of the body of Christ teaches that each believer is like a part of a body, distinct but incomplete without the others. St. Paul writes that if one part suffers, the whole body suffers, stressing deep interdependence. This vision emphasizes love, charity, and shared responsibility as core duties within community. In Islam, the concept of the ummah goes beyond mere social association. It is a spiritual brotherhood that binds all Muslims together in faith, prayer, and mutual obligation. The 5 pillars themselves reflect both individual devotion and collective practice, reminding us that worship and social care are inseparable. Buddhism presents another model. The Sangha, or community of monks and practitioners, is one of the 3 jewels alongside the Buddha and the Dharma. It represents the importance of walking the path together, recognizing that enlightenment is not pursued in isolation, but through mutual encouragement. In Hinduism, the concept of dharma emphasizes duties that individuals owe to family, society, and the cosmic order. Dharma creates harmony and balance, making community life both a responsibility and a spiritual practice. Judaism, too, frames community through covenant, the sacred agreement not only with God but with one another, ensuring justice, hospitality, and remembrance. Each of these traditions shows us that community is not an accident. It is sacred, and within that sacredness lies obligation, care, and the recognition that we are never fully alone. Literature has always been a mirror reflecting both the beauty and dangers of community. Victor Hugo's Les Misérables offers perhaps one of the most stirring depictions of what it means to live responsibly within a community. The bishop's small act of mercy toward Jean Valjean changes the course of his life, reminding us that kindness can ripple outward into entire societies. Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Brothers. Karamazov wrestles with a darker truth. If individuals reject moral responsibility, communities unravel. The famous line, "We are all responsible for all," suggests that true community requires radical responsibility for the lives of others, not just ourselves. Other works provide warnings. William Golding's Lord of the Flies illustrates what happens when community structures collapse. Without shared norms and responsibilities, chaos and cruelty emerge. Similarly, George Orwell's Animal Farm shows how the dream of equality can be corrupted when power is misused, turning community into oppression. On the other hand, novels like Toni Morrison's Beloved remind us of the power of communal memory and healing. Community can carry trauma, but it can also hold the possibility of redemption. Literature teaches us that community is never neutral. It either uplifts or corrupts, depending on the choices of its members. Through these stories, we are challenged to reflect. Do our communities heal or harm? Do we act as characters of compassion or characters of neglect? The stories we tell shape the communities we live. In today's world, community faces unique challenges. Digital technology connects us across continents, yet many report feeling more isolated than ever. Social media provides the illusion of community, likes, followers, comments, but often lacks the depth and responsibility that true communities require. Sociologist Robert Putnam famously wrote Bowling Alone, where he described how traditional forms of community life in America, like bowling leagues, civic groups, and neighborhood clubs, have been steadily declining. The result is less social capital, less trust, and weaker bonds between individuals. Meanwhile, urbanization and mobility mean that many people move frequently, making long-term rootedness in a neighborhood rare. Virtual communities, while valuable, can sometimes prioritize echo chambers, reinforcing division rather than genuine dialogue. Communities fracture into tribes of ideology, where disagreement is treated as hostility. And yet, even within these challenges, new possibilities arise. Online platforms have allowed marginalized voices to connect, and global communities of learning and activism have formed. But the key question remains, do these communities cultivate real obligation, or do they encourage passive consumption of connection? The modern crisis of loneliness suggests that while technology can amplify voices, it cannot replace the embodied face-to-face presence of true community. The challenge of our time is to rediscover the balance between the digital and the tangible, between connection and responsibility. Community plays a profound role in shaping identity. Who we believe we are is often a reflection of the groups to which we belong. Our families, our schools, our places of worship, our nations. All these communities provide narratives that become part of our self-understanding. Philosopher Charles Taylor explains this through the concept of the dialogical self. Our identity is not formed in isolation, but in dialogue with others. We are recognized, affirmed, and shaped by the communities around us. Without recognition, identity feels incomplete or even invisible. Religion, again, illustrates this truth. In Judaism, rituals like Passover are not only spiritual observances, but also communal acts of identity formation, binding generations together. In Christianity, baptism is both personal and communal, marking entrance into a shared identity. In Buddhism, meditation within the Sangha provides identity as a practitioner, reinforcing that enlightenment is not a solitary act, but a communal journey. But identity shaped by community also carries risks. Communities can impose rigid roles, stifle individuality, or exclude those who don't conform. History is filled with examples of communities defining identity in oppressive ways, excluding women, minorities, or dissenters. Thus, community identity must always be tested by justice, compassion, and inclusivity. A healthy community affirms uniqueness while nurturing belonging. The dialogue between self and community is not static, but a lifelong negotiation, one that demands reflection, courage, and care. At the heart of community lies the question of obligation. Do we owe something to others simply because they exist, or do obligations arise only when we make voluntary commitments? This is one of the most enduring ethical debates. The philosopher Immanuel Kant believed we have categorical duties, unconditional moral responsibilities that bind us regardless of our preferences. For him, treating others as ends in themselves, not as means to an end, was non-negotiable. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, however, emphasized the social contract, where obligations emerge from mutual agreement, a kind of collective consent. Modern ethics adds another layer. Care ethics, championed by philosophers like Carol Gilligan, argues that obligations are rooted in relationships of care and interdependence. We do not choose to be born into families, societies, or even humanity itself, yet those ties create unavoidable duties. But obligation can feel burdensome. If we see community only as a list of debts, it risks becoming oppressive. Yet reframing obligation as a gift, as the opportunity to be part of something larger, changes everything. When we care for others, we discover that meaning itself is relational. The ethics of obligation remind us that freedom without responsibility becomes selfishness. Responsibility without freedom becomes servitude. True community requires balance, choosing responsibility not as a burden, but as an expression of our deepest humanity. In our time, community is no longer just local. We live in an interconnected world where our choices ripple across oceans and continents. Climate change, pandemics, economic systems, and migration remind us daily that we are bound in a global web of interdependence. Philosopher Martin Nussbaum advocates for cosmopolitanism, the idea that every human being belongs to a single moral community. This does not erase local attachments, but it challenges us to think beyond borders. When we buy clothing, food, or technology, we participate in global systems that affect the lives of workers we will never meet. Religious traditions echo this vision. Pope Francis, in Laudato Si', speaks of caring for our common home. Buddhism emphasizes compassion for all beings. Indigenous philosophies often hold that the earth itself is a community that transcends human boundaries. But global community raises questions. How far do obligations extend? Do we owe as much to strangers across the world as to our neighbors? Some argue that responsibility diminishes with distance, while others insist that injustice anywhere diminishes justice everywhere. What is clear is this: to deny global community is to deny reality. Technology and travel have made us neighbors to all. The challenge of the future is to discover whether we will live as hostile strangers or as compassionate members of one vast human family. Communities are fragile things. They can take decades to build yet collapse in a moment of betrayal, violence, or mistrust. History shows us countless examples where communities thrived under cooperation and crumbled under division. Consider the fall of the Roman Republic, where civic bonds gave way to corruption, power struggles, and violence. Or consider small-scale examples: a family divided by resentment, a neighborhood fractured by prejudice. Trust is the invisible glue holding communities together, and once broken, it is difficult to restore. Philosopher Hannah Arendt argued that community requires not only trust, but also forgiveness. Forgiveness allows communities to heal from harm and rebuild bonds. Without it, mistakes become permanent walls. Fragility is not weakness. It is a reminder of value. Just as a fragile vase is treasured because of its delicacy, so too must communities be handled with care. To nurture them requires patience, empathy, and ongoing commitment. The fragility of community teaches us humility. We should never take belonging for granted. Instead, we should treat every act of kindness, every effort of cooperation, as an investment in something precious and worth protecting. Looking to the future, we must ask, what kinds of communities will we leave for the next generations? The rise of artificial intelligence, climate crisis, and global migration mean that future communities will look very different from those of the past. Some worry that technology will fragment us further, replacing genuine community with digital simulations. Others believe technology will enable stronger communities through unprecedented communication and cooperation. The answer will depend on how we choose to use it. At the same time, environmental challenges remind us that community is not limited to humans. Future communities must include the land, animals, and ecosystems we depend on. Indigenous wisdom teaches that our duty extends to the seventh generation, yet unborn. In politics, the question of community will define how nations relate to one another. Will we retreat into nationalism or embrace cooperation across borders? Education, too, will play a role, teaching children not only knowledge but also empathy, responsibility, and a sense of belonging. The future of community is open-ended. It can become more divided or more united. The choice belongs to us. The responsibility belongs to all. To deepen your exploration of community, I want to share a few resources that expand on today's themes. First, Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone remains a foundational text in understanding the decline of civic engagement and the urgent need to rebuild social capital. It is both an academic study and a passionate plea for community renewal. Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov offers a profound literary meditation on moral responsibility. Its haunting claim that we are all responsible for all continues to echo in conversations about the ethics of community. Victor Hugo's Les Misérables reminds us that acts of mercy and compassion have the power to transform not just individuals, but entire communities. Its characters embody the struggle between selfishness and solidarity. George Orwell's Animal Farm stands as a warning of how communities can be corrupted when power is misused, while Toni Morrison's Beloved reflects on memory, trauma, and healing as communal processes. Together, these books show the many faces of community: fragile, inspiring, tragic, and redemptive. For ongoing conversation, I recommend 3 podcasts. On Being with Krista Tippett is a gentle yet profound exploration of what it means to be human in community. The Ezra Klein Show provides critical insights on politics, society, and culture, always touching on how communities form and fracture. Philosophy Bites delivers short, accessible interviews with philosophers tackling core issues, many of which directly relate to social obligation and belonging. Finally, for online resources, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy offers excellent free scholarly articles on key topics like community, obligation, and justice. The Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley provides research-based practices for building compassion, empathy, and resilience in communities. These resources invite us to keep reflecting, keep questioning, and keep building better communities. We began with a question: what do we owe to each other? Along the way, we explored the philosophical foundations of community, the religious and cultural visions that shape it, and the fragile bonds that sustain it. We examined challenges: digital isolation, fractured trust, global responsibility, and yet we also discovered that community remains one of the deepest sources of meaning in human life. What emerges is a truth that transcends cultures and times. We are not isolated individuals. We are relational beings, shaped by others and shaping them in return. Our freedom finds its fullest expression not in separation, but in solidarity. To live in community is to accept both joy and responsibility. It is to recognize that our lives are woven into a larger tapestry: families, neighborhoods, nations, and ultimately, the world itself. Each choice we make either strengthens or weakens the threads of that tapestry. The fragility of community should not discourage us. It should awaken us to the urgency of nurturing it with care, compassion, and intentionality. Every act of kindness, every moment of forgiveness, every effort of cooperation is an act of preservation. As we move forward, the question is not whether we will live in community. We already do. The question is, what kind of community will we create? One of indifference and division, or one of solidarity, justice, and hope? The answer lies with us, with me, with you, with all of us together.